we tend to talk about family history issues in very disconnected pieces. So if we're sitting in a doctor's office, we're giving our family medical history, what we know of it, if we know it. Not everybody does. Not everybody has all the pieces. Or maybe we take a consumer DNA test and we find out, either it's exactly what our family told us or that we've got some surprises lurking there.
Yes.
And which is
which we have in our own family, have had surprises come from that. So
yes. I think we are actually living in the time where we're going to be the last generation that gets surprises. If you think about it, 40 or 50 years from now, the field will have expanded. People's willingness to share information and gather information, doing some of those testings will have matured, and there probably won't be quite as many surprises, but there sure are now.
There are.
But
exactly.
Or we get together over the holidays and we eat grandma's casserole that we've always made, or her terrible fruitcake but we have to have it.
Jello salad.
That's a part of communicating our story. We go to a funeral and we hear stories. But all of those pieces tend to be very disconnected. And if we are called to wholeness in Jesus, then all of those pieces need to be integrated.
Sometimes the story we tell ourselves is not really true. Sometimes the story others tell about us is not really true. Here on today's Heartlift with Janell, we are going to learn how to rewrite our story. So pick up your favorite pen and journal, grab a cup of something delicious, and start your heart-lifting journey towards living a meaningful life.
Hello and welcome to today's Heartlift with Janell, and we have with us today just the incredible Michelle Van Loon. Welcome, Michelle. I am honored beyond words to have you in our presence today and in our community. Thank you for being here.
I'm so honored to be here. So this is good. We're already starting off in a good way.
It's mutual honoring. Mutual Admiration Society.
Yes.
Because your newest book, Translating Your Past, Finding Meaning in Family Ancestry, Genetic Clues, and Generational Trauma, is exactly what I want to bring to the table this year. Because epigenetics is a conversation that we have introduced here in this community. We have a little tiny bit of understanding. I've introduced Mark Wolin and his work, and you and I were just talking about his work. But your book is like a primer, if I'm allowed to say that, or just a really fantastic guide to really understanding what this means and why it is important. So why don't you start by just telling us why it's important? I've read it. I know, I get it, but my community has not yet. So why is this important, and why was it important to you to write this book?
We tend to talk about family history issues in very disconnected pieces. So if we're sitting in a doctor's office, we're giving our family medical history, what we know of it, if we know it. Not everybody does. Not everybody has all the pieces. Or maybe we take a consumer DNA test and we find out, either it's exactly what our family told us or that we've got some surprises lurking there. And which is
which we have in our own family, have had surprises come from that. So
yes. I think we are actually living in the time where we're going to be the last generation that gets surprises. If you think about it, 40 or 50 years from now, the field will have expanded. people's willingness to share information and gather information, doing some of those testings will have matured, and there probably won't be quite as many surprises, but there sure are now.
There are.
But
exactly.
Or we get together over the holidays and we eat grandma's casserole that we've always made, or her terrible fruit cake but we have to have it.
Jello
and
salad.
That's a part of communicating our story. We go to a funeral and we hear stories.
Mm-hmm.
But all of those pieces tend to be very disconnected. And if we are called to wholeness in Jesus, then all of those pieces need to be integrated. And so I wrote this book out of a long journey of trying to make sense of my own story. There are secrets in my family story.
Wow.
There was trauma, there was abuse, all of that is true, I think, in more stories than not.
Yeah.
Whether we know it or not, whether we're aware of it or
consciously.
Not. And so,
right. Because they are playing out subconsciously, right? They are playing out subconsciously.
You referenced Mark Wolyn's book. I also used it as a reference point in my own writing about generational trauma. And we tend to play out those stories and those wounds sometimes without even realizing what the genesis of them are.
That's correct.
But I didn't write a super academic book. I just wrote a book because I'm super curious. I've been curious since I was a teen. And I think what launched me was, probably many of your listeners may be familiar with the TV show or TV series Roots.
Yes.
That was hugely popular in the 70s. And that just kind of broke open
it did.
A lot of family tree research questions for the common man. Before family tree research had been kind of left to royalty, or to the daughters of the American Revolution, and not to the rest of us. Alex Haley's work, for better or for worse, there was certainly some questions that have arisen about his work over the years, but he did us all a great favor by making it possible to start asking those questions.
Yeah.
And
he started the conversation. Yeah. I love anybody who starts a conversation.
Yep.
Because it is much needed. And that's what your book is doing today for us, is starting a conversation. It's like, where, what, how, why do I keep, for me, it's been more of, why do we keep tripping over the same things in our lives, or what is wrong with this relationship? And having done therapy and, study and all of that. And then there's still something that's more liminal spacious or more, right? That you go, Absolutely. It has to be otherworldly. It has to be something that has been passed down from the third to the fourth to the fifth generation, which is totally biblical.
It is.
We know
it's not the part of it's not going to ever end up on a coffee mug or a plastic you can put in your kitchen
or hanging on the wall. No.
But it's deeply true that those family stories affect us. And one of the frustrations for me, I came to faith in Christ as a teenager at the tail end of the Jesus movement. My parents
in the 70s, right? You said
both Jewish. Like I'm a total Jesus freak child of the 70s. My parents were Jewish. I'm Jewish. And so I did not come into the church with any sort of background. I came in almost as a complete blank slate.
Right.
I grew up in a predominantly Jewish community. So I knew there were Gentiles around and Christians, and they were all the same. If you're not Jewish, you're
the other.
You're the other.
You're the Gentile.
And so I was super eager to embrace this Christian world as my new family. My own family rejected me on a lot of levels after I came to faith in Christ as a teen.
Where and how did that happen?
My family moved when I was heading into my teen years out of that Jewish enclave into a predominantly Gentile community.
Okay.
And it was the Jesus movement. And I had a friend who came to school one day and told me, I gave my life to Jesus last night. And I'm like, but y'all are Christians already. I mean, you're all the same. And like, it did not make any sense at all. She
That is
might
so
as well
good to
have been
hear.
speaking Esperanto.
Wow.
And she eventually, we smoked a lot of weed. We had a lot of conversations about Jesus. And over time, I was very unhappy, began reading my Bible, which we call the Old Testament, First Testament. And eventually, a friend of hers who actually was a little bit more dialed into the faith than she was, like he wasn't smoking weed with us every day and talking about the Bible. He suggested I read the Gospel of John.
Yes.
And so
beautiful.
It was a very scary thing for me to do. But the first time I read John 14:6, where Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
Wow.
I was like, that's who you are, Jesus. I just couldn't understand how God could have a son and why he had a son.
Right.
And that was like all the lights went on. And now here I am almost 50 years later, still proclaiming the same thing.
It's the way.
So
the
anyway,
only way.
I counted on the church to kind of be my new family. And I got that from reading scripture. You know, I like, for some reason, I think as a teen, I kind of zapped over the fact that every single epistle was written to address conflict and problems in this new family.
Right.
Possibly except for Philippians. But anyway, I really wanted this new family to work. And part of that was that, especially in those days, you would come into a church and they would say, we've got 7 steps to fix your marriage. 3 tips to raise your kids. 4 principles to run your finances.
Michelle.
And I was like, well, this must be it. So I understood by omission more than through anything that anyone taught that my family of origin didn't really matter. It was just my faith. And there is,
from that moment of reception and acceptance of Christ, then the rest is the past.
Right. It's all the past. And so
it wouldn't translate into the present or the future.
It wouldn't translate into the present. And so I understood whether that was right or wrong, whether it was intentional.
I did the same.
I don't believe it was intentional.
I did the same. No, it wasn't intentional. Right.
But I now have had moments, especially over these last years, that I've been researching and writing this book. So I've been really immersed in the subject matter. I will look around in a worship service on a Sunday morning, and I think everybody is carrying the stories of their ancestors with them.
You can
now,
see
other cultures in the world get this.
They do. They absolutely do get it.
We don't get it.
We don't.
But
you can see the bag, right? You can see the luggage or the suitcases. I'm sure you can feel it. You seem very intuitive and very hypersensitive to that, which I love. Yes.
Right. And those stories shape us profoundly, and sometimes in a subterranean kind of way. Like, you know.
Yeah. Way down deep in our subconscious. We know that now. We've had enough research in the last 20 years, moving into more than 20 now, about the affect of trauma on our lives. Thank God.
Yes.
You
Absolutely.
Right.
And epigenetic trauma, epigenetic, just for
Yes.
anybody who might be listening, it's a very sciencey word, and I'm not a very sciencey person.
So we have you
I'm a
here.
writer. I love words. I love theology, but sometimes you got to do some sciencey learning because that's part of the world that God gave us. And epigenetics is it's a newer study. It's got some controversy to it, but there's a lot of hard data with it that says that trauma kind of sits on top of our genes.
So what a good way to say that.
It's not for example, somebody who survived the Holocaust, they're not genetically passing down that they went through the Holocaust. But what happened to their body, the starvation, the terror, the disease, the grief, all of that stuff, kind of works on our genes differently, and it gets carried down to subsequent generations, basically supporting some of what those Old Testament pronouncements that are never going to end up on a coffee mug tell us, that the consequences of trauma carry on, even if the next generations are living a great life. Just physiologically, we may be more prone to weight gain. We may be more prone to certain kinds of genetic diseases because some of those little triggers get turned on like a light switch because of the epigenetic trauma that's at play. So it all sounds very weird, but if you think about your own story, you can see how that played out. Because I'm Jewish, I'm part of a community that's been studied a lot by people that are doing this kind of research.
That's so true.
And surprise, if you have people that are persecuting you and killing you and telling your grandmother to get out of the Ukraine when it was called the Ukraine and not Ukraine, that trauma is kind of part of what God uses to make you. He doesn't pull it out. He doesn't overwrite it with your faith. It's still there. And we are new creations, but we are becoming new creations.
That's correct. Well. We're being sanctified daily, if we want to get theological with it. There
exactly
is sanctification is that process that we become new every day until the day we become glorified and go to be with Jesus. So we're going to feel theological here, which is also like, I have heard many arguments against, now we're just calling sin trauma, and it's not the same. It isn't. Okay. Let's say alcoholism. My dad was an alcoholic. I remember the first church I was in. He's a sinner. He's bad. He's so bad. He's the sinner. Well, my father, I know to this day, had PTSD. He was in Vietnam. He came home a wreck. He had childhood trauma, So I just want to differentiate that right here from the very beginning of this, that, we're not saying, oh, we're just glossing over sin. That's not that. It's not that at all. But I love the way that you described that the trauma kind of sits on top of the genes, right? It's just this ever-present little wound, this little divot, or whatever you want to say.
It's an actual physiological, it can be studied by sciencey people, as well as talked about in the larger context of trauma. And trauma and sin are not the same. There's overlap, certainly in places. It's not like if you were going to draw a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
It's not like they're two non-connected circles. There's overlap, but there's also differentiation between the two.
Yes. So, which is what I try so hard in my own work to do. It's like we have to kind of bring that here in the present and look at it and from all angles. And thank God, like I said before, we now have wise people such as yourself giving us more information so that it is a deeper work and it's a truer work to me. It's a truer work when you understand your genome, when you understand your family, history more and more. I had the privilege of going to my maternal side in the Czech Republic and going all the way up to Ersky Broad, where my grandparents met, and got to see this huge book from my fifth and sixth cousins of genealogy study that they had done, and how, they came from one of the brothers and my family line came from the other brother who came to the States. So it was just the most
That's so cool.
Phenomenal. Like, I wish I could go back and do it again, because I now have so much more knowledge and I would ask so many more questions. But to then even understand communism and to understand the stoicism. And, that's probably why my grandmother never signed "Love Grandma." She just was stoic, but they came by it honestly.
Right.
So I just think it's critically important. The one of the things I just really grabbed onto in the very beginning of your book is when you're talking about generational history, and you say, if you don't find out about it, if you don't take the time, it's like having a rock in your shoe.
It's true.
Tell me. I love how you put that so simply. It's like you just have that little pebble or rock in your shoe.
Those stories are going to affect you whether you are conscious of them or not.
Yes.
And so being able to welcome those stories into your understanding of who you are,
awareness
of your faith, of the way that you relate to the world is part of how you give good gifts to your children and your grandchildren. By ignoring the past, which is your stoic grandmother. I had a grandmother who left what was the Russia, then USSR, Ukraine. The border shifted a lot.
Wow.
He left during the pogroms of the beginning of the 20th century. They kicked, Jews were fleeing for their lives.
Yeah.
And until the borders kind of got closed in the early 20s here in the US, there was a huge flood of immigrants, just like my grandmother.
Yeah.
Well, if you talk to my grandmother, her life started when she got to central Illinois, where she eventually landed.
Yes.
Anytime I would ask her, any kid can tell when you've asked a question and the grown-up is like, we're not talking about that.
Shh.
But then there's also and we're never going to talk about it kind of silent subtext of it's just not terrible things happened.
Terrible things. Like, that's what I was going to say, because it just was too re-traumatizing, right?
Right.
Probably for them, and not having the tools. Right. They had no tools. It's not what you did. It's not what my grandparents did. I can remember the last time I saw my stoic grandfather, Joseph. He had his hands on his hips, and I was 10, 11, or 12, can't remember exactly, but I was running around the front yard barefoot, free and, frolicking as my little artistic self did back then. And he just said, "Put on your shoes. Put on your shoes. You need to wear shoes." And I just thought it was cute. And then that's the only time he goes, "I love you." And I was like, wow, I feel that, but it was just the only memory. But now I'm thinking, wow, probably to frolic around in the grass in the front yard with no shoes on and with that kind of freedom. He'd never experienced that.
Right. He's never experienced it. And shoes for a lot of immigrants, like that was like pure gold.
Absolutely.
So suddenly he's telling you a whole bunch of other things, which you're a kid, you're American.
Yes.
Got
no clue.
No clue. But those clues are all part of what shapes our story. Yes. I also write about adoption in here. Not everybody has access to those, whether it's because of a silent grandparent who won't talk, or because,
It's locked up
The
somewhere.
records are closed,
Mm-hmm.
but we can still gather a lot of information about ourselves and our story in lots of other ways. And
Mm-hmm.
those ways count just as much
Yes.
as your relatives, gorgeous book that you viewed. They're all
Yes.
part of the puzzle pieces. We're not going to
Mhm.
ever be able to decode every piece,
Right.
but that understanding is whatever we can understand, and the questions we carry are super necessary
Yes.
for our own identity.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more.
And
But I think,
people of faith.
yes, our heritage, our ancestors, like you said, I mean, that was passed on in the Old Testament quite a bit. You just mentioned, let me look here at the, yes, okay. Well, I have two things I want to talk about: decoding, but I also want to ask you, because I love words like you, and I am curious as to why you chose the word translating. So if I let me read this from the book first, because I love it. A translator converts words from one language into words in another language. The technical side of a translator's role includes a mastery of grammar and vocabulary of both languages. The art involved in translation includes nimble interpretation of each language's nuances, idioms, and slang. Language is a living, ever-evolving thing, and sensitivity to how real people communicate is the difference between a skilled human translator and a computer program that might get the words correct but obscure the meaning in the process. Translation expert Vijay Kumar Das, I will probably say that wrong, writes, a translator is a reader, an interpreter, and a creator all in one. As we seek to make sense of the story, which is what we pound the table of here, of our ancestry genes and generational trauma of the past, we are engaging in a sacred call. Oh, Michelle, to make sense of that story, we are engaging in a sacred call to listen, understand, and transmit meaning. And let me add this last sentence. Some might view the subject of exploring family stories as a self-indulgent exercise in nostalgia. But if a cachet of wistful, melancholy, sepia-toned memories is the sole product of this effort, then we are missing the profound gifts of identity, purpose, and hope that come with the redemptive work of translating the past. Holy wow. That is so good.
I have feelings.
You do
about this topic. Yes.
Feelings about how we are actually neglecting, in a sense, the complete redemptive work for our lineage, for our life, but for our lineage. That's what I'm all about. Like I have been dedicated, just had my first 2 grandbabies this past year. And when I had to be present, it was like, I felt I have been waiting for this. My husband and I made a dedicated decision, 38, almost 39 years ago, to raise up a godly heritage. And so to hold that next generation, I just had to whisper in their ear. I had to say, oh, baby girl, baby boy, yeah, you're here. You're just, I'm getting chills, and speak truth into their ears, as they're just brand new in this world. So I love that you have strong feelings about us translating our past. So that word translate, why was that the word that you chose?
Well, for me, the exercise hasn't been about becoming a genetic family tree researcher expert. I can only go back so far. People that get kicked out of countries, as all 4 of my grandparents did, the records weren't so great. They were actually, the people who kept better records were the Nazis, who were able to, I think, access some of my relatives that got left behind in the old country.
Yeah.
So they have very good records for all the wrong reasons. So records alone are not the answer. Any of the other pieces, whether it's our ethnicity, whether it's where we're raised, the community that we're raised in, whether it's our family, the places where our family has split apart, the only way to make sense of data is to approach it with the heart of a translator, which is to not only gather the information, but understand what to do with it and what it means for someone else. And I also say in the book, we are not just passing on this information within our families. It's how we're relating in community.
Oh,
so even if we
absolutely.
don't have children, we are forming relationships with other people in our churches, in our workplaces, in our towns. And those relatives are with us there as well.
They are.
Without being, too woo-woo about it.
Yes. I think that's why we don't do it, though. I think there is a lot of, oh my gosh, that's in the Buddhist tradition, or that would be in the Hindu, or that would be in the Japanese Asian culture, or, I've been to Thailand. I have seen the altars. I get all that, but this is not woo-woo. And I'm tired of not bringing things to the table so that we can have an intelligent conversation about them, because they might be considered woo-woo.
Right.
Well, Jesus was pretty woo-woo, wasn't he? I mean, he picked up mud and put it on somebody.
That I include discussion questions in this book is because I want people to feel free to start talking about their stories, and for us to be able to go, aha, like I see. And sometimes it takes somebody else witnessing that story to be able to give you, another piece of the interpreter's lens that you might need to make sense of your own. When they, is that why your whole family is so, fill in the blank?
Yes, exactly.
Opinionated, creative,
whatever. Or stoic, or unfeeling, or afraid to talk about emotions or feelings. Exactly. Without a doubt. Okay. So you also talk about decoding the double helix, deciphering the language of our DNA. Please inform us somehow. Give us some information about what that means.
Because so many of us are taking tests. And in my case, it's not just the consumer tests. I took a couple of them. And guess what? They told me, yes,
you're Jewish.
You're 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. Surprise. As if you couldn't look at me and listen to me and be like, right, we totally see that. But I've also had medical DNA testing because I've got a rare inherited condition. And so the research hospital where I get treatment for that condition, it was like, would you mind if we poked around in your DNA for these specific things? We are just at the beginning of all of this information. The human genome has been decoded, started and finished within our lifetimes.
Yes.
They are just at the very beginning.
Right.
But being able to see not only, this is where I get my curly hair or my blue eyes or my inherited genetic condition. That's only part of it, but we still bring the same interpreter's task to that, because no two of us are the same. We're not just being cloned off of a mother or off of a father. God is using all of that to create someone and something completely new and unique. There is a design, or there is a designer within the design that we may study. And that's a part of the interpreter's task as well, is to recognize we are created in the image of God, and he is using all of these ingredients, the trauma, the DNA, all of that, the history, the choices, the divorces,
yes,
the marriages,
the infidelity, right?
the
Mhm.
secrets,
The addictions,
all of that.
Mhm.
That's why, as much as I love being able to get into the data, I'm a research kind of person. I love
Mhm.
it,
Me too.
but that's just information. It might as
Yeah.
well be a card catalog in a library
Mhm.
without somebody being able, to kind of, what
Yeah.
does this mean? How does this go into who I am? It's not all of who I am,
Mhm.
obviously, or I would not be a person who is a follower of Jesus. I would just,
Right.
so faith and choice,
Mhm.
all of that plays into the story too.
Mhm.
But being able to honor it all is
Mhm.
a big deal.
Right. We talk a lot in our community here about, holding things in two hands. Like in one
Mhm.
hand we hold joy, the other hand we hold sorrow, and we have to integrate it.
Mhm.
So today I really see, okay, we're holding our family history. We are holding our
Mhm.
genetical DNA that's been passed down for centuries and centuries and centuries. And in the other hand, though, we as followers of the one true God are holding miracles and holding discernment and holding insight.
Mhm.
Am I right in saying that? Because,
Yes, absolutely.
and hope that, okay, just because great, 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 great grandfather so-and-so,
That's right.
that doesn't mean I can't actually pray. That's where
Mhm.
I put my prayer now. Deliver us from anything in the unseen. Make me conscious of what
That's
is
right.
in the unseen. Make seen what is unseen.
Mhm.
Is that
I
how this
I
works?
I totally agree. In the chapter on epigenetic trauma, I
Yes.
tell the story of a young woman that I know, a friend, who just, if you could make like a laundry list of every terrible, terrible thing that could happen to a child, this
Yeah.
woman had it all.
Yeah.
And it resulted in, when she was in her 20s, of a counselor that she was seeing telling her she needed to call the Department of Children and Family Services to report herself for the abuse the physical abuse she was starting to
Oh,
wreak on her children.
right.
Because the counselor said, I'm a mandatory reporter, so it's either going to
Yeah.
be you or me, and it will be better if it's you. Well, my friend did that. She was
Wow.
already seeking help.
Yes.
She knew that she was a train wreck and a
Out of
dumpster
control,
fire
whatever.
and
Correct.
whatever.
All blowing up. Mhm.
But she has also learned over the last 15 or so years since that crisis moment, you can address the trauma of the past with new ways of being. No, it's never going to be just like an easy thing that flows out
No.
of your internal self. You're always going to have to involve
Mhm.
cognitive hard work.
Yeah, because the body keeps the score. We know that.
The
We are
body
very
keeps the
well
score.
aware. Right.
But she has done the work.
Oh.
She has, whether it is in the area of nutrition, whether it is in
Wow.
counseling, whether it is in other,
She took an integrated approach and
she
got help
has
from a lot of
done
different
the work.
angles.
But part of it is recognizing
Mhm.
her own story. She couldn't do the work without doing that other stuff that involved a lot of grief and
Yeah.
sadness.
Mhm. It's
But
painful. It's painful to look into that
it's painful,
reflection.
but it's
Mhm.
not a fatalistic or deterministic kind of like, now you're doomed to repeat the same horrible
Exactly.
things. You may see
Exactly.
patterns, but
Yes.
with God, you
Mhm.
get to work on a new script.
You
There
do.
is a new way forward.
So good. Say it. Preach it. So good. It's so good. we absolutely can rewrite our narrative. We absolutely can. Or as I like to say, integrate the old with the new, right? So that we're wholehearted, because it's part of, it is who I am. I am a child of an alcoholic. I am da 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 da. I am all of those things.
That's right.
But I am also a redeemed child of the Most High God.
That is right. But you can only speaking as a writer, you can only rewrite if you've got some awareness of what it is you're looking at.
Without
Otherwise,
a doubt. Because it's called rewriting, right? Rewriting.
Yeah,
it's
rewriting.
Not, right.
It's editing. It's
editing.
All of that. It's translating.
That's my new word. You have totally given me. I almost want to be a translator instead of a coach. I'm like, can I get certified somewhere in being a translator of family history?
Yeah.
Where can I do that? Because
if you find that place, tell me, because I would sign up for that.
Maybe we'll start that place. I don't know. I would love to be. I don't want to leave this conversation, period. But I do want to leave with some tips, some tools, one place to start, an action step, whatever you want to call it. And you have one of your chapters, and of course, Heartlifters, it is all in this book. Filling in the blanks, listening to the mysteries in our family narrative. How do you've given us a little bit already, but how do we first become aware? We know we have to become aware. We have to go, my life is blowing up, like your friend, the story. That's where mine started. I can't keep living this way. What is wrong? Why do I keep doing these patterns? Why? So how do we listen to the mysteries? How do we do that? Do you have some wisdom for us?
Right. None of us will be able to answer every question. So being able to kind of start with, I'm not going to know everything. One of the things after my mom died, I remember thinking, now I'm never going to be able to ask her, what color was her childhood bedroom? For some reason,
That's so funny.
I knew a lot about her. I was learning a lot about her childhood, but I didn't know what was it like for her to be in that bedroom.
What a great question.
A canopy bed? Did she?
Fascinating.
Whatever. No matter how much we know, there's always going to be stuff we don't know. We don't even know our own stories well enough, much less, forbear.
Yes.
But I think for me, the key is to hold these stories with a lot of curiosity. The more questions you can form, even if you don't get the answers, asking the questions can sometimes open a line of thought or inquiry, and definitely of prayer. Not necessarily for the answer, because sometimes, as we know from reading the book of Job, you may ask why, and you're not going to get the answer. So it's more just being able to form the questions gets you in a conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
With your story in a new way. And that is always a worthwhile pursuit, because it also shapes who you are to the world around you.
Yeah. I'm so curious, Michelle, having your history, your Jewish history, the heritage, the anguish that your great-grandparents had to have gone through, and them before them, like leaving Russia we know that's top news story here in our world again today.
Again.
How, in all of your research, I'm curious, because I do work and I call myself a novice researcher, and I'm not a clinical psychologist or applied. I wish I was, but I'm not currently. But my novice research, how do we then, after we're becoming aware, we start to ask really good questions. And if you don't have the questions, you just be curious, look around, maybe look at a family gathering. Maybe, I know when my mom was, I went through a 9-year, almost a decade of just caring for her and it was arduous. But asking, questions. But then after she passed, since you were talking about that, this past fall, I was in Kansas for the birth of my grandson and was there for 5 weeks. And my brother visited. He's about almost 9 years older than me. So it's almost like we were in different families in a sense.
Sure.
And he starts telling me things when we're walking about our family that I was like, how have you waited all of this time to tell me these things? And we're walking, and my daughter was ahead of us with my new granddaughter who had flown in from South America. A lot of information, I know, but it's important because she hollers back and she goes, Mom, turn on your recorder. Turn it on.
Awesome.
Record this conversation. This is our family legacy. This is important. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's so smart, right?
That was super smart of her.
But I want to encourage all of you Heartlifters because that's what it looks like to start understanding. It's just, I am so curious.
Right.
I am the one.
And having those conversations. Yeah. Now it's interesting. Sometimes people are not super excited to share the stories,
No.
So even if you hit resistance with a family member, if you're in that kind of setting, we don't want to talk about that. That's fine.
Yeah.
That goes in your pile of questions. Why not?
Why the silence?
Why not?
Right. Why not?
Because sometimes you can put a hypothesis together.
You can.
Is, like about your very stoic forebears, and
the shoes, like that just came to me. I'm really the last few months. It's like, oh wow, that must have had way more significance than I thought. Right. And you just affirmed that. I also think that it's about timing. Like perhaps I wasn't ready,
right,
to have that information brought to me until it's past that God knew, and that's why I love holding God and all of his power over here, because he does have a Kairos time for us to have things revealed to us, because we have to be prepared for that.
And also, people in the second half of their lives tend to be more interested in doing this work anyway, as you're trying to kind of figure out what is it that I'm leaving behind? What is my legacy? What am I passing on? What do I need to know? What do I need to make peace with? All this is not disconnected from that part of our spiritual growth and development,
which you talk about. And if you would be so kind, please come back, Michelle, to talk about your first book, Becoming Sage, Cultivating Meaning, Purpose, and Spirituality in Midlife. What? It's so good. I just love the cover. I love everything about it. So we are extending an invitation. I'm extending an invitation because I do think that is exactly right. It's as we are developing, becoming more mature. And for me, it's seeing the grandchildren now come. Okay, well, I don't want to pass on. I want to make sure I can be as whole as I can be, as imperfectly perfect as I can be, to carry on, and give them a legacy worth carrying on. So my last question to you then is, how then, if all of these things that are unearthed are hard to take or hard to process, how then have you seen to make meaning and make peace with it without it devastating us?
There are things that get unearthed that are best unearthed in the company of a good counselor.
Okay.
There are other parts that may need the companionship of a good coach or a spiritual director.
I like it.
I have accessed all of those things.
Me too.
There are others that benefit from ongoing conversations with close spiritual friends that are willing to pray and grieve and talk.
Yeah.
And
Catch their
there's
tears.
other parts of the conversation and the translation process that just belong in us being aware of who we are in community, in our church, in our homes, in our extended
safe spaces. Mm-hmm.
So everything all matters. Not everybody needs a counselor for everything. But some people would definitely benefit. It definitely was helpful for me to walk through some of what I write about in the book with a counselor first.
Yes. And I like to really say a trauma informed. I think that's really important to me.
Yes.
It's been very important. Yes. To school myself, to go and get certifications and to really understand how generational trauma or childhood trauma, how it does inform our present. I'm curious, because back in the day, before these last 2 decades of understanding trauma, don't poke the bear, don't wake up the tiger. Are there ever times in your experience or in your research or in your thoughts where you think it's just better that maybe isn't woken up? It's a big question, but
it may be for some people.
For some people. Okay.
It may be.
Depends.
Like,
That's a good
I'm
answer.
always like, I
want it all.
I need to know.
Yes.
And I will get what I need to help make sense of it, but I need to know. Not everybody wants to go there.
Yeah. Okay. I like that.
There's lots of grace in that, but there's also parts of your story that you can go there. So you don't want to go down the road of that maybe,
sexual trauma.
Your father fathered other children and and you just cannot handle
can't bear it.
meeting them. Like, I get that. And that's one that definitely might require a counselor, and there's support groups out there and all of that have all emerged for people that are trying to make sense of some of those family secrets. But there's other parts, like your ethnicity, like just the parts that you do know that maybe just are an invitation to go a little deeper in thought and in honoring the work that God has done. You're here. God has you here, and He is your father beyond all of that. And I talk in the book, I have a chapter about the story that Scripture tells us about genetic history. That was
do share. Go right ahead.
It was joyful to write and to be able to say, we're connected to that story too.
Yes.
Like, this is a part of that interpretive task.
That's beautiful.
That's
part of our history. It's part of our history.
Yeah.
It's our ancestry. And it's beautiful. It was such a big deal back in the day. Unless we have the genealogy accounts in the beginning of Matthew in these books that you just pass over. Leviticus, I'm
we
just not reading
zoom
it.
Past them unless we're looking for a weird pet name. That's what.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, Michelle, this has been so life-giving, so powerful. And I just thank you. We all thank you so, so much for being so jubilant and for being so authentic. It's very important. And we can't wait to have you back to talk about becoming sage, because I would like to become sage in my maturity. So thank you, bless you, and please keep doing the work that you're doing and enjoy your beautiful life.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
You're
my
so welcome.
honor.
Aw.
Do you want to go deeper in your faith even while you're on the go? No matter how busy the season you're in, Access More has a library of faith-based podcasts to help you grow spiritually. With podcasts from Christian thought leaders such as Christine Kane, Lisa Harper, Taryn Wells, and Bob Goff. You can hear podcasts on religion, culture, family, entertainment, and so much more. Access More gives you a safe space to find inspiring conversations about faith. Start listening today at accessmore.com.
Thanks for listening today. It was great having you here. For even more great content and resources, please join the Stronger Everyday online community at janellreardon.com. Always remember, you, my friend, have value, worth, and dignity.